too, because I had a good lunch, and if I keep sitting, my eyes might just be tearing. So I know you had a good lunch too. So thank you for having me here. My name is Rudy Bropleh. I was born and raised in Liberia. That's a long ways from here. I'm one of 23 kids. All right, so I want to do a 30-minute presentation in 7 minutes, because I only have 10, and I just used 3. So I want to talk to you about this malady that I think, or amongst us, the people call melodies. And I think the way forward is back. I know that sounds like crazy, man. You know, we got a commission on the way forward. You know what I mean? We want to be going this way. That's cool. We can make progress, but the way forward is back. So you know what? Let me see if I get these things. Am I hitting the wrong thing? What am I doing? Right there. There you go. You know, so we got this little, you know nowadays, it's a disorder. I think we do. We got a little disorder in the church, you know, and we're distracted and we're not doing what we're supposed to do. You know, some people are not doing what they're supposed to do. They're hiding the comic book, they're saying crazy stuff, and so we're in this state of disorder. And Scott talked about the disconnection. The disconnection leads to dysfunction. The dysfunction leads to disarray. So God is calling us to get back to where we need to be as the Church of Jesus Christ. I pastor a church in West Virginia, and it's only my second church. The first church we started in Baltimore with 20 persons in the ghetto, and grew to 250, and then we left Baltimore, went to West Virginia with 93 people, and we grew that fellowship to almost 1,000 people. The way I see the church, and we all know this, so I'm preaching to the choir, most significant disciple making takes place in the local church. So for me, the local church is where it's at. So we have to be focused, be faithful, and that God will make us fruitful. But you and I both know that in this environment, it's pretty tough to be focused. We're struggling to be faithful, but my goodness, all the distraction, you know, I don't know how your annual conferences are, but mine is like a conference of libraries and special interest people. That's what it feels like these last 5 years. We just go into lobby for our position, get our way, and then we leave. We hardly hear about disciple making, baptism, growth. But God is calling us to change that. So while we're anxious to move forward, we need to take a moment of that. See, because it started. So here's what we're going to try to do, right? For the 5 minutes I have left. The facts are some things we know related to this issue in our church and amongst us. The fix, some things we should know or can do to address the ailment as a church. The future, some things we hope will happen. Focus on that third one, because Joe is the expert. He's going to talk about general conference and all those probabilities. I want to talk about not what will be, I want to talk about what should be. So, here's some of the facts, right? We didn't start off this way. And we got a good presentation from Scott. We didn't start this way. John Wesley, our founder, had a strangely warm heart, and his focus was discipleship. Mm-hmm. It was holiness. Those words that are absent in some places. John Wesley had a focus. He was bodacious, and he was intentional. We are descendants of this Wesleyan tradition. We too must be the same way. So we didn't start with all this rancor, even though it's been before some years with all of this stuff, but we didn't start that way. That's what I mean by back. I mean looking back, leaning back, reaching back, learning from yesterday, and see what we can glean and move forward. So a connectional system can be a great asset. I have the privilege Having lived in other parts of the world, I travel 6 continents, I work on 6 continents, and I do a lot of work with the African churches. This past August, I had the privilege to meet Dr. David Watson and Tom Lambert and some other. We were in Nairobi with training the Central Conference and prepping them and helping them so that they'll be ready come February. So the connectional system can be a great asset, but it's not working like it should. And I think what we saw in the earlier presentation, we see part of that reason. There's some disconnect in critical places. But our system of connection can be great for disciple making. We got to think, rethink, and get back to that. UMC is growing in some parts while maintaining or dying others. And Joe's going to come and tell us more about that. 4 to 6 years, we've been mumbling, we've been grumbling, we've been vacillating, and now we're just openly defying and disobeying and all that stuff that's caught up with us. So it's a malady, I think, amongst the people called United Methodist. It's a real ailment that needs urgent care. Here's the good news. But God. But God, who is rich in mercy, but God, who is able to do more than we can even ask him, but God. It's still the bedrock of our church, so at the end of the day, we'll be fine. So if we move from the facts to the fix, get the name brand, not the no brand. So I do training sometimes. I ask people, we'll do this little game at the beginning. I'll say a name and then you give me a synonym that describes that person. So I'll say Michael Jordan, everybody say basketball. I'll say Ray Lewis, everybody say football. I say Tiger Woods, everybody say golf. See? And then I'll say the Methodist Church. And then people go, So this is the problem we're running into. We are going to a no brand situation when we ought to be a name brand. We want to be an inclusive church, great. But in the process, please don't exclude God. We want to be all inclusive. So those are the code words that seem politically correct. We want to be inclusive church, great. I love that. But don't exclude the cornerstone, the bridegroom. Don't exclude God. Because then we become the no brand. There's nothing special about our. Oh, we do relief work, great. But the Red Cross does that better. Oh, we have after school programs, super. But the Boys and Girls Club do that better. See, we are the only group of people who peddle hope where it makes sense. In hard times, we can say be hopeful. We're the only group of people with spiritual research. The Bible said we are what? Spiritual house unto the Lord. So we can't try to be everything else and lose our true identity. We have to be a branded church. I'm sure a lot of you do. I study churches because most days of the week I have no clue what I'm doing. So I always try to figure out what other people are doing. But guess what? The churches that are growing in America are the churches that are focused, their Christology is tight, and who they are. Well, I was born and raised in Africa. Over there, that's easy. There's no wishy-washy stuff. Here, we've been blessed with so much, and all of a sudden, we're so sophisticated. So we're losing the brand. When you lose the brand, then the church becomes irrelevant. And for those who keep saying we're losing people, please be honest. Look at the stats. There are other people who tried this formula of inclusivity. They didn't do too well. So don't be fooled into thinking that if we let go of all of our biblical traditions and standards, everybody's going to come flooding into our church. No, we'll be the no brand, and who wants a no brand? We got to be known for something. And so we want to be the branded church. We want to get our brand back. The intellectual and the spiritual, especially days like these. Who's leading? So here's what I think. I think churches that allow the spiritual to guide the intellectual do well. I think churches that allow the intellectual to outrun the spiritual struggle. Now, is this an either or? Absolutely not. God created us as his higher order, right, of creation. So we did the stream of, we had people send folks to the moon. We do all these incredible things. Great. We got GPS, folks. You can just talk to it. Get me to Evangelical Seminary. It takes you right there. See? From West Virginia, back in the woods, it brought me straight here. Boom. We are very intelligent people. It's not a competition, but for the church, the spiritual must lead the intellectual. Here in America, I think too often in our church in the recent past, we want the intellectual to guide the spiritual. That's why we're struggling. Across the water, they allow the spiritual to guide the intellectual. That's why they're thriving. See? It's not out of order. Don't leave your head home. We need head. Okay? But we have to have the heart and we have to have acts of faith. So I think moving forward, we have to be clear. So when you look at those three planes, one of those planes seem to prioritize the spiritual. That's because we are the church. The others are negotiated stuff. And when you try to put us on the level with God, it's always going to be a problem. What's the fix? Vote for a final resolution, not a forward resolution. Folks, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be in St. Louis, like I'm sure many of you probably would be. Well, you know what? We go to these general conferences often. And you know what we hear? That what one conference gave, another one can take away. So, if we go to this conference, we need to try to come up with a final resolution. No more kicking the ball down the road. Because we got to run after the ball again. Kick it down the road. We got to run after it again. It's our ball. We are better if we resolve this finally and be healthy than try to stay together and be very unhealthy. The church of tomorrow has to be the church of the committed, not the church of the constrained. Because we'll always have the situations we're having today. So I think St. Louis needs to be the beginning of a final resolution so that we can focus on the main thing, which is disciple making. And of course, God's going to help us. So here's what I think the features ought to look like for the church that will thrive. The foundation has to be Christ, always. And that foundation is non-negotiable. From that foundation comes the covenant. And the covenant must be unbreakable. If I am a covenant maker, then I must graduate to become a covenant keeper. That's called integrity. In other words, if we sit in this room, we agree that we all are going to go and get a cup of coffee. And then I walk out of the room and say, I ain't getting a cup of coffee. Even if I didn't vote for it, if the room say everybody need a cup of coffee because at 2 o'clock we're going to all fall asleep, let's get a cup of coffee. I need to be a covenant keeper. So the covenant must be unbreakable. Our commitment should be unshakable. Our commitment should be unshakable. Meaning, when we gather together in the plethora of our diversity, we should not be questioning our foundation. See? Because the foundation is non-negotiable. The covenant is unbreakable. The commitment is unshakable. And you know what that does? The community then becomes respectable. That's a church that's going to win souls for Christ. That's a church that will be branded. That's a church that people in 2018 will want to come to. That's a church where my 5 kids, all of them young adults, will want to go to. Because my 20-year-old asked me, he said, Dad, what's our real brain? I said, yeah, what's our real brain? He said, who are we really at the church? He said, I need to know that. That's how I can get my friends to come. when they ask me about the church. Think about that. That's the generation we're trying to reach. The 20 years old and others. Community that's respectable. Because the commitment is unshakable. Because the covenant is unbreakable. And Christ, his teachings, that foundation, that cornerstone is non-negotiable. Folks, I think Romans 8:28 is going to come to pass. All things are going to work together for good. At the end of the day, if we're faithful, God will handle our business and our church will be fine. Thank you for listening.
I think it's my turn. I'll try to be brief as well. Hopefully everybody has seen a copy of this. I try to put it in every chair. Something that you might find useful. I'm Joe DiPaolo, by the way. I should say, by the way, there's a little short shrift on my book. It really is it's a good book. About a bishop, the first bishop to superintend an annual conference outside the U.S. in Liberia in 1853. Bishop Scott, that's what the book's about.
It's not right.
Mount Scott Church in Liberia is named for him.
Oh, so I got to get a copy.
I think so. But and he pretty much was the guy who was behind the creation of the first conferences in the U.S. to fuller it in black preachers. Anyway, that's my sales pitch. So 2000 General 19 conference coming up. What can we expect? I have this really weird place I find myself that I kind of get all this information from three sources. I'm a delegate, so I will be there. I'm on the Governing Council of WCA, and I'm also on the Commission on General Conference, which has planned the 2019 General Conference. And I can tell you a little bit about the procedure we just adopted. So it's really odd to be in that place, but there we are. On the front page where you see the map of the U.S., that's just to give you an idea of some of the numbers that I think are driving where we are. One of the things that has been really, I've said to churches as I've met with them, is that we are in this place of crisis and schism, de facto or near schism, however you want to characterize it, precisely because we, the Orthodox, Wesleyan, however you want to put that, majority, number one, are a majority, and not by a little. And number two, have been so successful in reasserting biblical teaching. Because what has happened is, as of about 2012, the progressives realized it was over as far as them ever being able to overturn our teachings on sexuality through the legitimate means of holy conferencing. That's why they began this process of disobedience, trying to force the change that they could not get through the legitimate methods of conferencing. And if you look at the numbers, you see why. These figures that you see are 2016 figures. They're the most recent available from the United Methodist Church when I put this together. And they show that we shrunk from 11.2 or 11.3 million members in 1968 in the U.S. to under 7 million now. But at the same time, there's been explosive growth overseas, so that we're at nearly 6 million outside the U.S. And the biggest chunk of that is in Africa. We are very soon going to come to the point where we are a minority USA church. Very interesting. And that's increasingly been felt in the votes that have been taken at General Conference, and is increasingly felt now in boards and agencies as Central Conference delegates take their rightful role in the governance of the church. So what this has meant is, I believe it's 42% of the delegates in 16 and 19 are from outside the continent of the United States. That's pretty wild. And the overwhelming majority of them are quite evangelical, quite historically orthodox in their view, certainly when it comes to marriage and sexuality. And so, just to give you another idea, take a look at where it says Western jurisdiction. The total membership of the Western jurisdiction, that is like the Western third of the U.S. is only about 300,000 members. There are more United Methodists in the Virginia Conference alone. There are more United Methodists in the North Georgia Conference alone. And in 2016, when they elected Karen Oliveto as a bishop, it was with 88 votes. 88 votes turned a 13 million member denomination on its head. So that just gives you an idea of the numbers. You are the majority, even though it doesn't feel that way sometimes. If you go on the other side, very briefly, I'll walk you through. I know in our conference, our bishop has been going around making presentations about what's coming up. And she said at all of our district meetings, there were 100 plans before the February conference. That's not right. There's actually 99 petitions that we have to deal with. And really they cluster in, unless there's some big surprise that we're going to get, and I don't think there is. The petitions really cluster into these first 5 options, and there are variations on 48 of the 99 are actually in the Way Forward Commission plan itself. And there are various ways that this one have to be altered to accommodate that plan. So there's not 100 plans. There's really only 4 plans, really. Conceptually, there's variations on it. You know the first 3, the traditional plan, the one church plan, the connectional conference plan. The simple plan has hit the news recently. That was put forth by progressive groups. The difference between the simple plan and the one church plan is that there are no conscience guarantees. So with the one church plan, supposedly, and I still have yet to understand how this is going to work, no church will be forced, no clergy will be forced to participate in or host or officiate at same-sex weddings. Everyone's supposed to have their conscience respected. That's supposedly the case in the one church plan. In the simple plan, there'll be they won't be there. If you have a member who says, I want my son married to another guy, I want to be there, you have to do it. You will be expected to do it, or you could be disciplined for it. So that's the simple plan. I do know that there have been petitions submitted for so-called amicable separation, which would basically have the General Conference declare that we're like a marriage that's irreconcilable, and we need to divide, and then carve up the assets and divide the children. That is before us. And then a 6th possibility is deadlock or no action. Let me just walk through really quickly. I think the simple plan is no shot. I don't think it's going to go through. The connectional conference plan is the one which would reorganize the geographical jurisdictions, you probably are familiar with that, into jurisdiction 2 or more, 3, I think, based on theology. But that requires supermajorities of 2/3 in order to enact the needed constitutional change. I just don't think there's any shot of that happening, that kind of consensus. So I think connectional conference plan and simple plan are not going to happen. Remember, it's about the same delegate mix as in 2016, when it was becoming clear after the first week that we were not only going to reaffirm traditional teaching on marriage, but we were going to put in increased accountability measures. So I don't see the votes being anywhere close for the simple plan. Connectional conference is just too high a bar. One church plan, I give maybe a 35 to 40% possibility, because it's being pushed so hard, but I really don't think it's going to pass. See, there's a lot of reaction to it. It's incoherent, really. And it's really relies a lot on us trusting our bishops. I don't think we trust our bishops. So I think the 2 most likely outcomes are the traditionalist plan, for which we have the votes. The question is, do we have the will? Or I actually think number 6 is a very possible outcome as well, that we are not able to make any decision at all. And if I were a progressive, I would be pushing for that. I would find any way I could to delay, and keep any kind of decision from being made, and then hopefully get a better delegate mix in 2020. So I think that's going to be the big danger going into the General Conference of 2016. If you look down below, you'll see key dates, key decisions. I'll leave that to you to look for it on your own, but one I will just point out to you, and that is next week, our Judicial Council meets in Zurich to review the constitutionality of the various petitions supporting each plan. So that's a wild card, because if they rule that parts of the traditional plan or the one church plan or even the simple plan require constitutional changes, then that raises that bar again to 2/3 majorities in order to pass, and makes it much more difficult. There's also lots of other wild cards that we just don't know. I mean, we do not know. But the last couple of General Conferences, we know that we spent an enormous amount of time arguing over the rules before we ever got to the substance of the conference. If that happens, we get gobbled up. Now, we're trying not to do that. As a member of the Commission of the General Conference, we tried to set it up in such a way that it does not require any changes to our rules. We can operate within the current rules. But no delegate is prevented from getting up and proposing changes. And we could get locked up in that. Another unknown is what happens if delegates can't get there? What happens if there are visa problems with some of our delegates from various countries, especially, I think it was Zimbabwe, one of the countries that has been having difficult times with getting visas. Hey, what happens if there's a snowstorm in St. Louis in February? Yeah. And half the delegates can't get there. So there's lots of unknowns coming out of this. But I do think, I'm optimistic that we will be able, I think we can see the traditionalist plan through. It could be altered, it could be watered down. But even, Scott alluded to this earlier, even if we are able to get the best case scenario, Get the traditionalist plan through, which has kind of automatic provisions for conferences and bishops to leave the denomination if they're not willing to live by the discipline. Even if we get all of that through, there's still two questions. Will we have the will to see it through? And secondly, do we have the endurance to stick it out? Because this begins a 20 to 30 year process of reform. And I fear that there's a lot of our compatriots who just want out. So that's another wild card. If the exit ramp is approved for everybody, that could wind up also making 2020 a progressive conference. So there's all kinds of unknowns and wild cards in here. But I do think, to your point, I do think there's a sense that I get talking to people across the spectrum, that people are weary of this, and they do want some kind of, I'm not sure resolution is the right word. I don't think it's going to be resolved, but a fundamental decision about what direction we're going to move in going forward. You know that the scriptural text when Jesus says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." There are a lot of, I've seen that cited, and a lot of people think that Abraham Lincoln made that up. They don't realize he was quoting Jesus. Right. But Lincoln did have an added little bit of insight when he said, and this was an 1858 Springfield speech, talking about the Union, half slave and half free. He says, "I do not believe the house will fall, but I do believe it cannot endure forever, half slave and half free. It will become all one thing, or it'll become all the other." And I think that's the case with the United Methodist Church. We are going to become all one thing or all the other. And I think the fundamental crisis moment for which direction it's going to go is going to be February. And we're going to know a lot by March. I want to give you one little advertisement before we go to questions. That is, this is the first time this will be announced. May 11th, put that on your calendar. We're looking at May 11th of this coming year for a regional WCA gathering in the Northeast. Probably going to be held in Washington Crossing Church, which is right on the Delaware River. We're trying to finalize that date. It's been tough to find a date that would work. We want to be in advance of the annual conferences. That is Mother's Day weekend. But I don't think most folks make a weekend of it. So hopefully you can see Mom Sunday and still come on Saturday. So pencil that in. You should be getting notifications about that within the next month. We're going to try to pull that out. I think it looks like Washington Crossing UMC, which is up right on the Delaware River, about half an hour above Trenton. Okay. So that way it's accessible to Jersey, Delaware, and so forth. So that's coming up. And we're looking at that being kind of a regional version of the WCA Global Gathering. And I think by then, depending on the outcomes, we may get quite a response. I think I'll pause there because I'm sure there are questions and stuff that you want us all to talk about.
One question, one announcement. November 11th, Susquehanna Conference is having their initial meeting of WCA local group that we are going to finalize the plans that we've been making, so we will officially be on board. Super. So we're going that direction. But for the approval of any of these plans, without the constitutional amendments require 2/3, but just for the vote on the plan, is that simple majority, or?
With the exception of the, right now.
Well,
if it's constitutional.
If it proves to be constitutional, next week we know. Other than the connectional conference plan, right now, the assumption is simple majority.
Okay. I misunderstood that. Thank you.
Okay, so you want to take a seat and you can open this up for questions for just, I don't know, do you have something you want to add before we open up for questions, Scott?
Rebuttal.
No, I mean, I think one of the things, just an observation that this makes clear is that the map on the front is that the entire Western jurisdiction should be an annual conference.
Yeah.
By any reasonable, equitable way of dividing up the resources.
Yeah.
And this is a structural problem caused by our jurisdictional structure. There are structural changes we have to make.
The annual conferences in Nigeria that are bigger during time was.
Yeah. Well, there's annual.
Geographically and numerically.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
Okay, so now I'm just going to say that we're going to have questions and address them to any one of the three people or all three. And
amicable separation you
Yes.
mentioned as a possibility, but is there actual any proposal out there for that?
There are specific petitions that have gone to the general conference that call for amicable separation. I do not believe there is any real support for it at this point, but if it's 4 o'clock on day 3 and we haven't gotten anywhere else, it could come back up.
And it would be a 20-year process also.
That I don't know, no.
Yeah.
I don't think it would take that long to divide.
Yeah, no, well,
It takes a lot longer to rebuild something than to destroy it.
And I mean, you know, the GCFA is already able to be an umbrella organization. And plenty of the agencies, we will just say, you can have it.
It is interesting to make that point. A number of the bodies affiliated with the United Methodist Church, like GCFA, like Westpath, like the Publishing House, like some of our foundations, Mid-Atlantic Foundation, have been repositioning themselves to be multi-denominational in the services they provide, because they are anticipating what may happen. Plus, a lot of our bishops, they have real consequences, like with the federal government, if they don't fulfill their fiduciary responsibility. So they've got to be on top of this stuff.
And they have very, very large endowments for which they don't actually need the church to support themselves. They've squandered away over the last couple of decades.
Right.
Question about the Western jurisdiction and all that goes back to me with the annual conferences. I understand back in 2016, the annual conference line should have been redrawn because of the mass exodus of members, so many members per bishop, and that was forestalled. Regardless of what happens in 19, what's going to happen when we redistrict or realign conferences and jurisdictions? Someone's got to be thinking about that. I mean, we're way overdue to change the borders on Eastern Penn Conference and Pendel Conference and all those others. Is that just got ignored? Someone's got to be manipulating the good in
At the
Congress.
jurisdictional level, that's being thought about, but I don't think people are thinking much about that at this point. They're thinking about the big blow up coming. Rudy?
No, I'm just saying, we're preoccupied with this big thing. So, those other important things fall out of the way.
I have a question, and I'm going to direct this one to Scott first. If we are able to pass the traditional plan, and with the penalties in place, with some kind of system, and do you think it's possible for there to be a revival in the church?
I think a revival is coming, actually, and not just within United Methodism, but more generally. That's not only my hope, but I just have a sense that there's weird stuff happening that is inexplicable. Like one of the 13 United Methodist seminaries completely changing to an Orthodox institution and welcoming the work of the Holy Spirit in its midst. Like Asbury welcoming the work of the Holy Spirit in its midst with its holiness background. I mean, that's not a thing of the flesh. Because those are entrenched positions that human beings don't do. So God is at work, and I have no doubt that the very sort of raging of the demonic that we are seeing in our culture is actually a sign that the church is waking up. Because there's no there's a whole section in Screwtape Letters where the goal isn't just to keep you oblivious and passive. Things have gone off the rails. So.
Well, so Joe mentioned about all of these kind of sort of unknowns. So one of the other things we need to pay attention to is, all right, so you see the demographics, and you see central conferences, the numbers are almost as close as ours. Well, there's another thing that we're hopeful about, but we're not sure. In 2019, so there's been a lot of visits to the continent. Tremendous amount of visits. Tremendous amount of visits. By the progressive, by the liberals, that have been offered to build school, parsonage, and all that kind of stuff. And so we've had situations where, you know, a particular bishop was signing on to some stuff, and conference staff, laity, delegates, nobody was aware. And so is that other X factor that we need to be very careful about? And that's one of the reasons I make these constant trips, because we want to keep people focused and keep them together. Because that block is critical. That block is critical, and those of you at 16, you saw that. That block is critical. So there's a lot of work that go into that, so that everybody's up to speed on the issue, so that the small things like be here, be on time, don't take that trip down the road, because it might call for a vote while you're gone. All those little things that people take for granted, want to make sure that they're up to speed and aware. Because to me, this is a fight for the church. And the fight for the church is a fight for the cause of Christ. So this is important business. So we just got to be mindful that we don't know the extent. We feel confident that the churches are together, but you never know. You never know.
Yeah, things can often turn on small decisions that, you know, look back in history and say this person had not been that particular moment where they were. Things could have turned in an entirely different direction. So, yeah, I mean, there's just so many unknowns. But, I mean, the good news is, God's already on the other side of February 2019.
That's the definition of omnipresence.
There you go. That's right. And I really do believe that we're going to get through this. It's going to be ugly, it's going to be painful, but I think we're going to get through this. And however it shakes out, and I think the church needs to be shaken out. On the other side, I think God is going to build something really neat. The Wesleyan movement is not dead, right?
This is why I'm so glad that it's going to be a committee of the whole, because there will be such a potential for the Spirit to move with all the people together in one place.
Does everybody know what she's referring to?
You might want to explain that.
One of the problems, I can explain this briefly, hopefully. One of the problems everybody was asking is how are we going to get through all this in just 3 working days? That's all we have. So the commission set up a process within the context of our established rules. So it doesn't require any rule changes. Day 1, if it's followed, and that's going to depend on who the bishop is presiding. Day 1, we will look at all the plans as a body, full body, 864 delegates, and pick a plan. That's the goal. By the end of day 1, we will, without amendments, without final votes, pick a general direction in which we want to go. Day 2, we will convene in legislative sections. You may know that the General Conference breaks down into those kind of subcommittees to kind of process the various petitions. Well, we have the option to have just one. We're going to have just one legislative committee. It'll be a committee of the whole. So then that will be the day 2, in which that particular plan will then be perfected through amending and sorting out all the related petitions that apply to it. And then day 3, we go back to plenary with the bishop presiding to finalize it, deal with any amendments, any minority report, and hopefully vote finally. So it at least create, and it was passed unanimously by the Commission on General Conference, which is kind of a rare thing in any church body. Everybody was like, some of us were like going off to the side and like saying, "Are you missing something here?" Because this, I like this.
Yeah.
I like this. This sounds like this is doable, and I can see advantages to help us get our desired result. So that's the plan. The odd thing about this is to stay within our rules and not mess with rule changes. That means that day 2 will not be presided over by a bishop. It would be presided over by a delegate. And it has to be a delegate who's been trained which means there's a pool of maybe 20 people from 2016 who are already acted as either chairs or vice chairs of legislative committees that can have that role. Plus, there'll have to be a secretary, so there'll be a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary, because it will be a legislative section, not a plenary. By the way, I'm one of the secretaries, so who knows? So that's going to be a lot of pressure on that one person who gets that job as chair, and it's going to be someone who's not used to dealing with unwieldy bodies. So that's going to be very dicey, but that's the plan, and it does offer us a path to actually get the job done.
How do you select that person, Joe? What's the process?
We're going to have to be elected by the body when they arrive, or on that day.
It's a pool of discrete candidates because you only have so many who are trained, right?
Right. There were 12 legislative committees, which meant that there were 24, but 4 or 5 were elected bishop. There's probably a few more that are that aren't going to be coming. I'm sure there's some that are going to opt out. It might only be down to a handful by the time we get there. I'm sure there are going to be people who say, "No way! I don't want. Do not put my name in for that." And there are going to be some who will want it.
What security arrangements are in place at the
Good question.
conference, to prevent like ragging and
There's not going to be any way to totally prevent demonstrations and disruptions, and I'm sure they're going to come. But I've not
Internally as well as externally?
Well, physically, because there's going to be, from what I understand, I've not visited, other members of the commission visited the site. It's going to be more like, I'm trying to remember which one. There was a previous general conference where the delegates were on one level, and it was kind of self-contained with discrete entrances and exits. And then all the observers were on another level.
Dallas Fort Worth?
That may be. I'll So the physical layout of the space is going to help prevent disruptions on the floor from outsiders. Now, it won't prevent it from delegates themselves. And it won't prevent people from the galleries making lots of noise. But they are looking at trying to have serious security measures, which happened in Portland too. But they had people at the doors with, I think they even had metal detectors, if I'm not mistaken.
And with the short schedule, 3 days, you hardly can afford any of those. Yeah.
Again, if I was progressive, I'd be planning.
I'm sure you're doing that. Kick the ball down.
Yeah.
You spoke of the Western Covenant Association. Its strength now, and how does it play into what may or may not happen? That seems you're sort of on the inside.
You know what? I'm on the inside of that. I would think I'd be interested in your perception of that as an observer who's not quite on the inside of that, as to what you think the effect of the WCA has been on this whole process.
Well, where I'm on the inside is, well, I'm in conversations about, potential future reforms. But my biggest experience comes from, I'm on the board of the Iowa WCA.
Oh, yeah, I know that. Right.
And what I think, I don't know what's going on in other parts of the country, but Iowa has done a good job of beginning to create a connection that will sustain when the current connection, if it fails. And I think, and that I was one of the people who was a big proponent of trying to do that. So, and I think that has helped a lot for us anyway. I mean, the conference, for lack of funds, had to give up their school for ministry, which was pointless anyway. But then the WCA started doing the School for Practical Ministry, and we had over 100 people come to an annual conference, School for Practical Ministry. I expect we'll have more than that this next year. This is excellent. We're actually training people to be able to make disciples of Jesus Christ in their churches. How weird is that?
It's the church being the church.
And one of the things that we, in our last meeting, suggested is that people from the WCA need to start having meetings in every district in with a sponsor in the back room of some pub or diner somewhere and invite your neighbors. So it's old-time itinerant ministry where somebody's willing to go out and have a meeting with whoever is willing to be there and you know, just so that people can see who else is interested in this in their districts. Yeah.
In Pendel Annual Conference, I've worked with others for 30 years on trying to get evangelicals together, and the vast majority of them would not emerge from the shadows. Now
They are.
coming out and joining the WCA.
I think
It's exciting, but it's also,
something I think WC has done is it has kind of put the larger church on notice that people have an alternative. I think the bishops entered this process thinking they're the holders of the keys, there's no other game in town, and the reality is there's now this framework in place to say, you know what, we have somewhere else we're going to go. And I think they realize that. And there's some fear about that. That's not to say that that's what I want to see happen. It's not. I want to see. I really hope our best option goes through, and we can reform this great communion. But I think it has put some fear into some of the leadership. I think it has. And people are coming out. 6 months ago, 5 months ago, people didn't want to talk about it. And now we've had district meetings, and they've been packed. Everybody's coming out because they realize the train's running out of track in just a few months.
When we had our delegation meeting in Baltimore, Washington, and we broke up a table, this is the delegates for general conference. We broke up a table, and they had one of the last questions that the delegates were asked was, what is your greatest fear? And the thing that astonished me was next to me was my district superintendent. She said her greatest fear was that there would be a large group of evangelicals that would basically take the church with them. She was referring to the WCA.
Sure.
And that's her greatest fear. And that really never crossed my mind. It's not a fear.
Please speak to the traditional plan and the gracious exit. Right. You already heard mentioned that there are some large evangelical churches that are ready to go. But will there be any progressives that will go?
Well, under the traditional...
Wasn't that the original idea that if you can't hold the covenant, you have a way to go?
Under the traditionalist plan that is in there, basically it requires every conference and bishop to commit to upholding the discipline going forward. And if they can't, they would almost automatically be spun off as independent or autonomous affiliated conferences.
Automatically?
I think so.
You could not be a reconciling congregation or conference and remain.
Okay.
And the question, and I don't know, because it's all, the devil is always in the details, but, how does that actually happen? Do we just, we used to, when we had charge conferences and we read people out, because they didn't show up to class meetings, there has to be a mechanism whereby that happens, whereby someone is not invited to participate in the next general conference.
It's a good question. Implementation is going to be...
And if there's nothing, if it's just an idea with no actual mechanism of enforcement, then we're back to the general conferencing saying stuff that makes no difference.
Which I think will be the part two. So I think the part one will be to decide, and then part we go. And then part two will be how we get there. So the implementation will have to be somewhere to be worked out, because it's not just going to be a matter.
Is there, in the traditional plan, a way of getting rid of the jurisdictional conferences?
No, because that requires constitutional change. So it's possible that the Western Conference, the Western jurisdiction, could be hollowed out, basically. There'd be no real conferences left. But it would still be a part of our structure. And then I guess we'd have to go in and kind of re-evangelize or replant churches.
Or, what is, I think, a better idea, is that if the traditionalist plan were to pass, and there could be some mechanism of enforcement prior to 2019 annual conferences, so that the delegates to 2020 could actually engage in real constitutional reform.
Sure.
And I'd
That
like
couldn't
to
happen in 19.
No. We could eliminate jurisdictions in 2020, and I would like to see, you know, personally, if somebody, if any of you guys want to just elect me the sort of successor to John Wesley. I know, I always posit this to my children, and I'm technically the head of the household, it still doesn't go, I never get the last word. But, you know, we could have, I would like to see us have 2 in a row, 2021, and then I think we should, you know, do the hard work of the structural reform, and then after 2021, we meet every 7 years. We don't meet every 4 years. And
Long time.
it's a long time, but if we've got the structure in place, we.
And it's working.
And, you know, I'm a church historian, so I think we got, you know, we're always worried that we got to fix it right now. There's some certain structural things that have to be fixed, but there are some, you know, 7 years is 3 more years than 4. It's just not that long. I mean, so.
And we
You
know
tend to think in
that
terms of
the
2 on 4 election cycles.
But that's an American problem.
I know.
Let's pick a biblical number. And then after 7 of these, we can have a Jubilee year.